Hello, assalamu alaikum to everyone here. I'm Rizwan Akram in Rizwan Akram classroom. As every day in classroom, I'm here as a student, and all the guests here are as a teacher. So today, a very special guest from UK. He was born in Pakistan, uh, and now he has a passport of Britain and living there for past so many years. He was just 1 year old when he moved to Britain, and now he's considered to be one of the 100 most influential Muslims over there. So, Muhammad Amin, welcome to the show, and please let the people know about yourself.
Thank you. As you said, I was born in Pakistan and I came to the UK with my mother in 1952. My father was already here and I've lived in the United Kingdom ever since. My parents were extremely poor and also they could not read or write, but they believed in the importance of education and they wanted me to concentrate on my studies. I was very successful at school. I went to a grammar school at the age of 11, which is the highest standard of state public schooling in the UK. At the age of 18, I was very pleased to get a place at Cambridge University, which I regard as the top university in the United Kingdom and one of the best universities in the world. I did a degree in mathematics. I then qualified as a school teacher, but after 1 year teaching in a school, I trained as a chartered accountant. I became a chartered accountant and specialized in giving tax advice. And I spent the rest of my career as a tax advisor. In 1990, I was very pleased to become the very first Muslim and second ethnic minority person to become a partner in the firm of Price Waterhouse in the United Kingdom, the best reputation accounting firm in the UK. And I retired at the end of 2009.
So, you have served in different perspectives, like you have been teacher and accountant as well. So, what was your passion when you were in your childhood? What was your dream job that you think you might have done that?
My dream when I was a teenager was to become either an astronomer or an astrophysicist, a theoretical physicist. And that's why I studied mathematics at university, because in Cambridge, if you want to be a theoretical physicist, you don't do a degree in natural sciences, you do a degree in mathematics with the options in theoretical physics. Sadly, although I'm extremely intelligent, when my IQ was measured, I have an IQ of roughly 1 in every 250 people. That wasn't good enough for the level of standard that I aspired to in theoretical physics, so I had to think about alternative careers. I was very fortunate eventually to discover accounting, which was a subject I found absolutely fascinating, and I always enjoyed doing it for the whole of my career, giving tax advice, and also it's a profession that is very well paid.
Mr. Muhammad Amin, would you like to share about the stories that your parents narrated? And did you visit Pakistan off and on, or either you haven't
I
come
have
here?
never been to Pakistan for different reasons at different times in my life. But there are some stories about my parents, my father in particular, that I've grown up with that I would very much like to share. As you know, the Pakistani community in the UK was originally very small. Of course, they weren't Pakistanis at that time. This was in the days of the British Empire before independence. My father came to the UK for the first time in 1931, and there was a very small community of Indian Muslims living in Manchester, also some Muslims from Arab countries. And I remember on one occasion he told me that he bought a sheep and he cooked a meal for Eid himself. He did all the cooking personally and fed his friends. And afterwards, they wanted to pass a plate around to collect money to pay him or pay him back, because he had spent all the money paying for this sheep, paying for the rice, everything else, and he refused to take the money. And he insisted that they take that money and open a bank account to build a mosque in Manchester. And that was the start of the bank account, the very first mosque in Manchester. It's a story that has always stayed with me all my life. And another story like that I want to share with you is when I was born. My father was actually in the UK at that time. And after I was born, when he got a letter that I had been born, again, he held a celebration for his friends. And they wanted to take a collection of money for him and for me. And he refused that. But he asked all of them, as many of them were students at Manchester University, highly educated, and he asked them to make a dua that his son would be educated like them. You can see as I tell you these stories how much emotional power they still have with me, and they've guided my life.
Okay, I mean, as you have told that these are some very uh, firing story hurting to you, even at such a age, you are still being very sensitive to them. Would you like to share, like you have told, narrated earlier, that your parents were very poor, but in 1931, as it might be a dream to come to England, so how your father managed to come here?
In 1931, it was a very different time. First of all, there were no visa restrictions of any kind. It was the British Empire, and the principle in the British Empire was that anybody who wanted to travel inside the British Empire could do so freely. So, in theory, if every Indian had wanted to come to the United Kingdom, they could have done so. Although, if all of them had tried to come at the same time, maybe somebody would have imposed some restrictions. But the truth is that very few people wanted to come. The reason my father came was that he was part of a large family of many children, and his father was killed in an accident after some kind of argument with a neighbor. They got into a little fight. My grandfather fell, injured his head, and he died. And my father was the eldest son. The family had very little land, and they were very poor in India. This was actually in the territory of Jalandhar, which is now part of the Indian Punjab after partition. And he'd heard from other people in his village about life in England. So there were already other people from his village in England. So he got the money together to come to England. He had an address written down to go to in Manchester. He could not speak any English, but he arrived by boat, landed in Southampton. By showing this piece of paper to people, to policemen, people would help him to get a train ticket, and eventually he got to Manchester, to this house where there were already other Indians from his area, and that's how he got a start. For working, he couldn't get a job, but the normal pattern of life for Indians in Manchester at that time was to buy some clothes, ties, shirts, jackets, blouses, socks on credit. So they would take a suitcase to the warehouse, fill up the suitcase with clothes. They wouldn't pay at that time. They would then take that suitcase, go around the streets of Manchester and the small towns near Manchester, knocking on doors and selling these clothes door to door for cash. At the end of the week, they would take that cash to the warehouse, pay for the clothes that they had bought on credit, buy more clothes, and because you're selling for a higher price than you're buying for, the surplus is what they lived on. That's how my father lived.
I mean, every Pakistani who has been living abroad, once in a while, thought about coming to his homeland, to Pakistan. Come to Pakistan and live here.
That was always the dream of my father, that once I grew up, and I have one sister who's 6 years younger than me, that when I and my sister grew up and were educated, the family would go back to Pakistan. But as we grew up, he realized, and my mother realized, that we were completely rooted in this country and that we would never want to go back. So his choice was very simple: to leave his children in the UK and go back to Pakistan with his wife, my mother, but leave us behind in the UK, or to stay with us. And of course, the choice that they made was to stay with us. They stayed with us until they died. We always lived in one house together, very traditional family. When I got married, my wife came to live with me and my parents. When my sister got married, she left and went to live with her in-laws. But they stayed, and they are buried here in Manchester. My father died more than 33 years ago in 1987, and my mother died in 1992.
I mean, your father was one of those people who have seen who might have witnessed about the partition. Stories may be witnessed, or somehow maybe I don't know, eyewitness or something like it's about World War I and II as well. Uh, what were the stories at that time? They have told you about the partition. Is there
Right.
any specific incident they can witness?
Yes, I can tell you about partition. My father was here in the UK continuously from 1931 until after partition. So he spent World War II here in the UK. So my father was
Right.
in the UK throughout World War II, and he used to tell me stories about bombs falling. He didn't get involved in any way in the war effort. He wasn't a soldier. One of his friends worked in a factory that made propellers, but I don't think my father was even involved in making things for the war. My mother was in India throughout with her family. She was living with her family and my father's family in India. And when partition happened, it was a terrible time. All of the family had to flee. Fortunately, none of our close family was killed during partition, but one member of our family, my mother's sister-in-law, the wife of my mother's brother, she was not well, and as soon as they got to Pakistan, she died. But that wasn't a loss through being killed. It was through illness and other problems. But she told terrible stories of what happened, the mass killings, and I was brought up with very strongly anti-Indian feelings as a result. I only lost those feelings when I was in my teenage years, when I met some people at my school from a Hindu background from from East Africa, in fact. But my mother grew up very, very, very unhappy because of partition, because everything had been taken away from them.
I mean, as during partition, we used to narrate the stories about something cruelties or something killings and on the name of honor killing and maybe suicide or even the whole villages have been slaughtered. So, is there any special incident that they have told you about it
No, as I said,
happen in front of them or in the village or something around?
my family was very fortunate and didn't suffer personal losses, and the stories about the killings were more about things that they had heard about, they may have seen. But remember, I was very young when my mother was telling me these stories, aged in single figures, but it had been a terrible, traumatic time. That was the key thing that I grew up with.
I mean, you and your father was the considered to be the first generation of the Pakistan who might be move abroad, but you have seen the Pakistan growing up, developing Pakistan, the country who is newly established and progressing. How your father narrate Pakistan and how you have seen progress of Pakistan in your younger age, at might be your teenage, or haven't you observed something?
Well, my father only went back to Pakistan himself for the first time in 1969 after uh, he, he went to Pakistan in 47 after partition, stayed for 3 years, but left before I was born, came back to the UK in 1950, I think. And then he didn't go back again until 1969 when his mother was dying. However, because I was from Pakistan, I was very aware of Pakistan. As I started to watch the television news, when I used to read newspapers, I always followed the news about Pakistan. I remember the riots that got rid of Ayub Khan. I remember Yahya Khan. I remember the Bangladesh War of 1972. So I followed Pakistani news all of my life. And in some ways, Pakistan has come on a long way. In other ways, the way that Pakistan has developed has been very unfortunate. It suffered greatly because of the wars in Afghanistan. It's suffering from a growth, as far as I'm concerned, of religious extremism. And the good thing is that for the last 8-10 years, we seem to have stabilized with democracy, because before we would have a civilian government for 4 or 5 years, then we would have another military dictatorship. After a long time of military dictatorship, there will be another civilian government, and we keep going like that, which is terrible because military governments are always wrong. I'm a great believer in democracy, in freedom. I've lived my entire life in the United Kingdom. I fully absorb British values about democracy, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, etc.
I mean, would you like to share about your views that why, as we are comparing most of the time with our neighborhood country, that's India, India has progressed much than the Pakistan. Do you think so? As you are there, you might have witnessed their progress as well. In Pakistan, is progress as well, and you might know about the Indians over there and the Pakistanis over there. So, what do you think? What is the gap between there?
Well, let's take it in two parts. The people in this country and the people in the subcontinent. Talking about the
Okay,
subcontinent first, and let's talk about both Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh.
okay,
After independence, India was fortunate to inherit the entire structure of the civil service, the administration,
good.
most of the country. So it inherited a very stable, and it was democratic all the way through, apart from Indira Gandhi's emergency. So India has always been democratic. The negative thing that they inherited was that Jawaharlal Nehru and the people around him, they were also strong believers in socialism, and their socialist values really held back Indian economic growth. India did progress from independence onwards until the early 1990s, but it was only in the early 1990s, with economic reforms brought in by Manmohan Singh, that liberalized the Indian economy in part to make it, since then, it's grown much more successfully. There's still far more to do. India still has so many stupid rules. For example, rules that limit how much money you can pay the chief executive of a company, rules that make it hard to fire people. It hasn't got a, until recently, it didn't have a proper single internal market between the Indian states because you had different customs duties in different states. With the introduction of national goods and services tax, that's a big step forward. So, but India has progressed, and that progression accelerated strongly from the early 1990s onwards. Pakistan's progress, in my view, has continued, but has been haphazard, partly because of irregular military governments, excessive state control. The interesting country to look at is Bangladesh, which was very poor, much poorer than Pakistan at the time that Pakistan split between Pakistan and Bangladesh, but has progressed much better, I think, in many ways than West Pakistan in the period from 1972. Coming, what's happening now in India with the Modi government and its obsession with Hindu nationalism, quite apart from Hindu nationalism being bad for the country politically, it's also bad for the country economically. And its extreme Hindu nationalism, I think, is already causing Indian economic growth to slow down. In Britain, uh, the British Muslims and British Hindus have both progressed extremely well. One of the differences between them is that many of the Hindus in Britain did not come here from the Indian subcontinent directly. They came from East Africa, where they had one or two generations of economic progress in East Africa before they came to the UK. So they came to the UK, even if they brought no money with them, with high educational standards, high business experience, and as a consequence have progressed extremely well in the UK. So on average, British Hindus are more successful than British Pakistanis, but both communities, many of them are doing very well. Others, particularly in areas where you have many recent arrivals, because it's still quite common, particularly amongst British people of Pakistani origin, to try to get their children married back in Pakistan, to bring a relative to this country, a nephew, a niece. And I regard that as a very, very retrograde step. When I was 16, my mother asked me, "Do you want to get engaged to your cousin?" I had some cousins in Pakistan. They were slightly older than me, but I knew quite categorically I did not want to marry somebody from Pakistan who had no English, who had no education, who had no appreciation of life in Britain. So I insisted that I was only going to get married in Britain to somebody who was a Pakistani origin person, but had spent her life in this country. My wife is a university graduate. She came to the UK when she was 13, but even coming at the age of 13, speaking no English, she was able to go to university and become a school teacher herself. So one of the things that has held back the British Pakistani community is this habit of trying to get their children married in the subcontinent. It's a big mistake.
So, I mean, where as you have told about your story, that you refused your marriage to Pakistani cousin cause she don't know about English. So, if do you think that if the Pakistani guys or Pakistani girls have good English, good communication, good standard of living, and good education, so they might be got married to any person in UK?
That's more reasonable because you have to look at the compatibility of the husband and the wife. Are they of similar age? Are they of similar interests? Are they of similar educational ability? I've got nothing against people getting married who are from different countries, whether we're talking about Pakistan and Britain, or Britain and America, or Britain and France. What matters is compatibility. But too many people in
Okay.
Britain, Pakistanis, will want to bring over a, a relative from Pakistan who is completely unsuitable for their children, but just because they are a relative.
Okay. I mean, so you are living out there. So, what is your perspective of your children about Pakistan? Either they think about themselves that they belong to Pakistan, or either they have been born in UK and brought up in UK, so they thought that UK is their homeland and they have no relation with Pakistan.
My children are, of course, know about the family's history. They know where their grandparents came from. They know where their parents were born. They know many people who have come from Pakistan because we have a large extended family, but they think of themselves entirely as people who belong in this country. Or my number two son has lived in America for the last 8 years and has no intention, I think, of coming back. They do not think of themselves as primarily culturally Pakistani. The eldest of my children, who is now aged 40, until the age of 7, he was completely bilingual. He would speak Punjabi to his grandparents and he would speak English to his parents, because my wife and I only ever speak one language to each other, which is English. But after my father died, he had very little opportunity to practice any Punjabi, so his Punjabi has disappeared. My other three children never had any Punjabi. When our extended family meets in London, we have a very large extended family, but everybody speaks English. So they are aware of their background, but apart from having a brown skin, having a different religious background, having different food background, cultural background, they still a lot of eat far more Asian food than other people would, then they do not think of themselves as particularly Pakistani. There's no reason why they should.
The last question is about uh, as you are living out there over there. So, what do you think about the religions that either Muslims living here are most practicing, or the Muslims living abroad are more practicing in Islam?
Well, first of all, one of the things that I'm very pleased about is I live in a country which has genuine religious freedom, which sadly Pakistan does not. In Britain, you can practice any religion that you want. You can change from any religion to any other religion. You can choose not to be religious. Nobody will come and arrest you. Nobody will come and kill you. And you can practice any variety of Islam that you want. In Pakistan, none of those things are true. And that is the most important difference between Britain and Pakistan. In Pakistan, you have a lack of religious freedom, even, and it's more than just what the law allows. It's also the way that people behave, where mobs will come and try to kill you if you behave in a particular way, even if the law allows you to behave that way. It's not against the law in Pakistan to be a Hindu, but Hindus in Pakistan are treated very badly. So, and what as somebody who's very interested in Islam, my view is that the most interesting thinking about Islam, the best study about the early history of Islam, the best study about the Quran is not happening in Muslim majority countries like Pakistan or Saudi Arabia or even Malaysia. It's happening in countries like Britain, America, Canada, Australia. I belong to something called the International Quranic Studies Association, which is a group of academics. I'm not an academic myself, but I'm very interested in academic matters, and they are based in the USA. And the most important advice I could give Pakistan is to think differently about religion and to recognize that Islam is a religion that believes in religious freedom. In the Quran, God makes it very clear that it's terrible to abandon Islam. You may be punished in the afterlife, but there is no punishment in this life for abandoning Islam. Although your life may be less successful, God is not going to shower blessings upon you if you abandon Islam, but you're completely free to do so. And of course, in Pakistan, you are not free to do so.
I mean, what about the going towards the end of the interview? I would like to ask about, the in Pakistan we are living in the cluster family and nucleus family system. In Britain, I think it's another different. Like even Pakistan is living in Britain, have different society and different cultures and different system of family. What do you prefer, or do you miss something that it should be a cluster family living together, like you told that your father used to live there?
Uh, I think it's important for people to be able to pursue the lives that they want. And when I was growing up, I never contemplated living separately from my parents. And the reason is a very practical one. I was extremely conscious about the enormous sacrifices that my parents made for me and my education. My mother didn't like this country. She stayed here for me and my education. And when my parents were old, I was never going to put them into a home. I was never going to take a job in New York and send them money. I was going to stay with them here in Manchester. And dragging them to New York would have been unfair to them as well. But I don't require my children to live with me. As I said, my second son lives in Detroit. My daughter, one of them, spent 2 years living in Japan. She's now in London. My other daughter lives in Switzerland now, and I have no problems with that. So it's a question of what opportunities are available to you. The idea that you keep your children tied to your apron strings all permanently, I think, is very backward.
I mean, thank you so much. You have given beautiful words and beautiful lesson to the Pakistani community. I would like to ask you give a message that can make effective progress of Pakistan, that can conclude the issues of Pakistan.
Yes, my message is very simple, and it's part of the message of the Islam and Liberty Network, a think tank based in Kuala Lumpur, of which I'm the chairman. Islam is fully compatible with religious freedom, political freedom, and economic freedom. And to succeed, a country needs all three of those.
That's awesome, and I hope that one day we'll all practicing the same freedoms as you are practicing over there. But it's a dream that might come true. We are hoping very best and very positive every day. Thank you so much, Amin. You have given
Thank you.
beautiful words and the best time of your time. Uh, I'm really honored to talk to a person who have witnessed being Pakistan divided, being Pakistan partitioned, and now Pakistan grown up. Thank you so
Right.
much for all the beautiful time. Thank you. I'm
Thank you.
honored.